Alright, we are going to start. السلام عليكم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن شاء الله نبدأ مقرر جديد. I just want to draw attention to the title of the course. This course is called African Literature. And I want to say that African literature is rich. So, African literature is rich. In addition to its richness, it reflecting the diversity of the culture and language and history in the continent. And here, the continent actually are talking about the African continent. When we talk about African literature, you have to know that there are three important phases of this literature. The first phase, it is the phase of oral tradition. We call it pre-colonial period. Pre-colonial, colonial, colonial means استعمار. So the time before the colonialism is the first phase of writing African literature. And this phase or this period began as oral tradition with the stories, with the proverbs, and with songs. Those stories, those proverbs, those songs passed down from generation to another. This means that literature at that time passed from generation to another orally without written form. These narratives often convey moral lessons, cultural values, and historical events. So, the most important thing that I want you to know as far as the process of writing literature during the time of pre-colonial period is that this literature tries as far as possible to convey moral lessons. What are goods and what are bads in life. Also, it tries to convey cultural values as well as that this type of literature convey history or historical events. And the forms of writing literature during that time has got various forms, including folk tales, epics, and oral poetry. So in this slide, we have talked about the first phase of writing African literature. We call it pre-colonial period. We have mentioned that in that period we have got stories and songs. Those songs and stories, they passes they pass from generation to another orally because at that time people do not know how to write, and the theme and the most important ideas of literature during that time were the process of conveying moral lesson, cultural values, and historical events. And the forms of writing literature at that time include folk tales, epics, and oral poetry. Now we are going to move to something else. The second period or the second phase of writing African literature, we call it colonial influence. This means that we are talking about the literature which has been written during the colonialism, and this type of literature has been written in the 19th and early 20th century. One of the most important characteristics and features of writing literature during that time is the introduction of writing. All literature has been written during that time. Before that time, African writers they don't know writing. They have got what we call oral literature. With colonialization, European languages become prominent. African writers began to compose literature in these languages. So the idea is that during colonization, African writers learned how to write literature in the language of their European leaders. If we want to talk about the authors or the writers during that time, we have got Chine Achebe in Nigeria, and also we have got another famous person called Hol Sonika. They began to emerge and address themes of identity, colonialization, and cultural conflict. These were the three important themes, the lessons that we can get from reading the literature of colonial influence during the 19th century. They were the lessons and themes of identity, colonialization, and the cultural conflict between the European culture and the African culture. The third period of writing literature was the post colonial literature, and this literature has been written in the mid of 20th century. Actually, one of the most important characteristics of this period of writing literature is the appearance of the national voices, the emergence of national voices. What do we actually mean by national voices? After independence in many African nations, literature flourished as a mean of identity and social issues. Another important features during this time is a feature of diversity of genres in writing literature. And we have said in our previous courses that when we say genres, we are talking about forms of writing literature. So during that period, this period saw a rise in novels. Writers began to write novels, plays, and poetry that tackled political themes such as the work of Ngugi wa Thiong'o and Panche. Ngugi wa Thiong'o was a Kenyan author. Those writers they began to write long novels and plays, and these are new genre in the process of writing literature. So during the post-colonial period, there is a source of diversity in genres of writing literature. Number four, the fourth phase is the contemporary literature, the literature which has been written after the 20th century. One of the most important features of that literature is the process of globalization and diaspora. Globalization means universal. Universal. Contemporary African literature has gained international recognition with authors like Chima Amenda, one of the famous African writers who has lived during the 20th century, is called Chima Menda, famous person. It explores themes of migration, globalization, and identity in modern context. So, what I want you to know as far as those four phases of writing literature is concerned, you have to know what are the features of each one of those three phases. For example, the first phase, the second phase, the third phase. As well as that, you have to tell me some examples of famous writers who represent each one of those three phases. And at the end, I want you to tell me what are the themes of writing literature during each one of those three phases. In this part of the class, we are going to talk about the themes and characteristics in African literature. You have to know that African literature encompasses wide range of languages, culture, and experience, reflecting the continent diversity. This means that in Africa we have got different languages. In Africa we have got different cultures. In Africa we have got different experience. So literature in this continent reflects and explain all those languages, those cultures, and those experience. Social and political commentary, one of the most important things, is the process of social and political commentary. People began to comment upon their social problems and their political problems. Many works address issues such as gender. When we talk about gender, simply we are talking about the equality in treating male and female. Also, another important theme is the process of colonialism, post colonialism, and cultural heritage. Another thing, interplay of tradition and modernity. There was a contract, a conflict between tradition and modernity. Some people prefer to be modern society, others they stick to their traditional traditions and customs and they have become traditionalists. Contemporary authors often blend traditional storytelling techniques with modern literary style. If I want to conclude the conclusion for the first class in our course, the African literature, you have to know that the development of African literature is dynamic and ongoing process. So this means that day after another we are going to have a change and development in the process of writing literature. And this is something good, by the way. One of the most important thing also you have to know as a summary for the first class is that characterized by its rich oral tradition and evolving writing forms. So in African literature we have got two main branches, the branch of oral traditions and the form of written literature. It techniques it continues actually, sorry, it continues to adapt a response to the complexity of African society and the global landscape. So, this is the summary of the first class in our course African Literature. We are going to stop here, and in the next class, we are going to talk about something else. Thank you very much.